we're talking about New England. Last time we talked about the South, and you'll notice the states that are counted as because we had East Coast as our first subject, but it was a little bit too big of a subject. So I decided to do something a little different, which was to just talk about basically the Northeast or New England. So we have Connecticut, Rhode Island, which is the smallest state. We have Massachusetts and Cape Cod right here. It's all part of the same state. New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine. So these are our main states here, okay? So here's our list of the states. We've got Connecticut, where the C is silent. You do not say Connecticut, but you say Connecticut. Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Vermont, and then we can also count New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. But I'm not going to talk too much about these three today. Okay. So we also talk about the northeastern megalopolis. Can you say that? Megalopolis. Okay. And that is that the most densely populated part of the country is in these three cities: Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia. In fact, these three cities have 67% of the population for all of the states of New England. So we're talking about 57 million people total, and 67 of them live in those three cities. So when we talk about the megalopolis, we're talking about Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia. Okay, so in the area we're talking about, there are 18 federally recognized tribes, okay, indigenous tribes, including the Iroquois, Iroquois nations and the Algonquin people. But of course, there are many, many more before that. So when we talk about the first white people coming in the 1600s, there were lots and lots of different tribes here, but these are the main tribes that are still present in that area. Okay. Then these are the states. There's a little in your lesson. There's a little explanation for each one. Basically, when I think about Connecticut, I think about the part New Haven, Norwich. These are cities that people often live in when they work in New York City, but they want to be outside the city. These are also very wealthy places. So Connecticut is about an hour away, that part of it. So many people in New York City choose to live outside of New York City and go there. But there are also other parts of Connecticut that are actually very beautiful in the fall, especially right now is a good time to go to New England because of the leaves turning beautiful colors, etc. So Connecticut, we're not going to talk a lot about Connecticut today either. We'll talk a little bit about Maine. Maine is everybody's dream place. Everybody wants to go on vacation in Maine. It's famous for lobster. Everybody wants to eat lobster in Maine. It's also very outdoorsy. So it's a place you want to go to be outside. There are lots of lakes. It's also obviously on the Atlantic Ocean. So beautiful place to be. And one of those, there are lots of small colonial towns in all of these states, but Maine is especially, considered a vacation for a lot of people, especially New Yorkers and people from Boston, etc. This is a vacation destination. Massachusetts, we're going to spend a lot of time in Massachusetts today, mainly because I used to live there. And so I have so many places that I love there that I thought I would take you on a little tour as if you were coming to my house where I would take you. So they call Massachusetts the heart of New England. It's also where the first pilgrims from England first came to America. Are you speaking, Bruna, or something? I heard some talking. Sorry, it's hard for me to hear here. So we're going to do a few stops in Massachusetts just because it's my favorite place and I miss it all the time. It's where I lived before I moved to Trieste. So it's a special place for me. And I lived on Cape Cod, which is also a vacation destination for many people, including the Kennedy family. So we'll talk about that as well. New Hampshire is also a very outdoorsy place. It has less people. It's very, Mount Washington is there. People, outdoorsy people like to go there. New Hampshire's motto is live free or die. So people are always defending their right to liberty. So New Hampshire people are very independent and rugged and outdoorsy type of people. So New Hampshire, you're going to go maybe go kayaking or canoeing or mountain climbing, those kinds of things. Okay. Rhode Island, we're going to talk about a little bit today. It's the smallest state, and it's a special place for me because it's a place I used to go often, especially Newport, Rhode Island, where they have these beautiful mansions. It was also a vacation destination um, for many wealthy families during the Gilded Age. So when we think about the Vanderbilt family, the Rockefellers, many people had their second or third homes in Rhode Island. So you can visit these very um, beautiful castle-like structures. And so that's a place I used to always bring friends. Then we have Vermont. Vermont is where people go skiing. So there's mountains. It's a place you'd want to go to get away from the urban atmosphere. It's beautiful in the fall. So all these places are interesting places for us to visit. But I thought we would start by getting something to eat because you know how I love to eat. So I thought we could start in Boston, where the famous soup, it's clam chowder. A chowder is a kind of very thick soup. So it's not a soupy soup. It's not, you could almost eat it with a fork instead of a spoon. And especially in Boston, the clam chowder is even thicker than normal. There are potatoes in it and there's heavy cream in it and clams. It's a heavy meal, but it's a meal in itself. So just having a cup of chowder is, and you would say chowder because you don't say the ERs in Boston. But you can eat it all year, but it's probably better in the winter. Okay. So there's New England clam chowder and there's Boston clam chowder. The only difference is that Boston clam chowder happens to be a little bit thicker than the New England kind. There's also another chowder that's famous in New York that's a tomato based one, but the famous one is the clam chowder that you find in this area. And of course, I gave you a recipe for it. Now, there's a famous place, they call it here the Ye Old Union Oyster House, but we just call it the Union Oyster House. And it got a photo of it here. And this very old restaurant has been around since 1826, but they say that it's actually been around for much longer, maybe in had a different name. But this is a special place because it's the same place that President Kennedy, so John F. Kennedy, used to go there every day, have a cup of chowder, and read 5 newspapers. This is where he would get information on what was happening in the world. So I think mainly when he was a senator, but anyway, when he was in Boston, he went to the Union Oyster House where he would either have oysters or his chowder and read his newspapers. So of course, when I'm in Boston, I also go to the Union Oyster House and I always get a newspaper, a paper one, and I read it so I can, and that you can even sit at the same table that JFK used to sit at. Just so you know, you can go where JFK went. Okay, and there's even a little link there where you can take a look at the menu and see what you'd like. Okay, then I thought we could go to have stuffed quahogs. Now it looks like quahogs, but they're called quahogs. And this is a really special place. This is called the Captain Kidd. This is a restaurant in Woods Hole, which is a place that was very close to Falmouth, Massachusetts, where I used to live. And a quahog is basically a giant clam. So you see it's a clam here, a clam shell. And what they do is these are clams that are they're a little tough because they're big, right? So you don't really you can't really eat them the way they are. And so what they do is they cut them into small pieces and they make a bread stuffing. So it's usually got breadcrumbs and probably some celery, and often has some kind of sausage. Now, in this area, they often use a Mexican sausage called chorizo. And so it just depends. I see who's chatting in here. Okay. Miss Nadia, no, a quahog is not, that's not what it is. It's actually a clam. It's a type of clam. So it's very particular to this area. Okay. So this photo that you see is a quahog. This is called a stuffed quahog, and it's food. Okay, so this is a special place that Captain Kidd is in Woods Hole, and it's looking overlooks the ocean. So Cape Cod is that sort of part of the of Massachusetts that looks like an arm. I'm moving up to the first page to show you what that looks like. It's this part here. You can see Cape Cod, and right on the tip of Cape Cod is a place called where is it coming to me? Well, halfway is Hyannis. Hyannis is where the Kennedys have their house, and Provincetown, excuse me, is on the very tip of it. Where I used to live is right here, okay, just under the elbow, if it were an arm. And so that's where Woods Hole is, Falmouth. I used to teach French at a high school there. Just moving back down to where we were. Okay. And so I used to go to the Captain Kidd usually about once a week and with friends, and you'd have a big beer. You can see it's a bar there and quahogs. So that was our favorite. That was my favorite thing to eat back then. I probably wouldn't eat it now because I'm vegetarian, but I sure love them. They're so good.
Yeah, in Italian, quahog, it's called the mercenaria. It's a mollusk. It's called
Oh, it is.
mercenaria.
Oh,
Yes,
thank you for that, Sylvia.
even mention
Okay.
it.
Okay, so then I thought we could go to Maine for lobster rolls. So a lobster roll, like the quahog, these are kind of like taking foods that are making them go further. So it's almost like I don't want to say poor people food because it's not really that, because obviously a lobster is a very precious food, but by making it into a lobster roll, you make it cheaper, right? Because you can take it doesn't have to be a whole lobster. It's just, the other parts of it. So it's the lobster meat mixed with some mayonnaise and some lemon, and you put it on a hot dog bun. So you can see exactly what it looks like there. Sometimes it's served with melted butter. And this is a delicacy in all of the northeastern part of the United States, but especially in Maine, where lobster is especially plentiful, and it's where there are lots of lobster. Do we call them lobster fishermen? I don't know if they're fishermen or not. What do we call them? I can't remember. Anyway, and then we have this photo here. This is a lobster shack. Okay, so lots of lobster being caught in Maine. So it's a favorite thing to go there and have your lobster roll sandwich. So those are the foods that I'm thinking about that I miss actually. But there's some places I'd like to take you to. So the things I'd like you to see would be, first of all, Plymouth Rock. Now, Plymouth Rock, in our mind, in the American psyche, is supposed to be this very giant place where the pilgrims came on the Mayflower. That's the ship. So the first Americans came, the first white people came. Um, and then you go to it and you realize it's just this tiny rock. It really is literally a rock. It says 1620 on it. So it's much smaller than I expect it to be like the cliffs of Dover, but it's not. It's kind of like going to when you go to Denmark and you see the Little Mermaid, and you're like, oh, she's so small. That's kind of how Plymouth Rock is. But it's kind of it's where things start in America. So I think it's a good place to visit. There's also a very good knitting store where you can buy yarn if you like to make things with your hands. So I really like Plymouth for that. So we start there. Then we're still in Massachusetts, but we're gonna go about an hour away from where we were. We're gonna go visit Walden Pond. Now, Walden Pond, this is what it looks like, okay? And you may have heard of Walden Pond because of Henry David Thoreau, who wrote the book Walden. He was from a wealthy family, and he decided to leave his family, and go live on in a little cabin. You can go see his cabin on Walden Pond for 2 years and then write about what he learned. Of course, we find out later his mother was always bringing him stuff. So he wasn't really living that portion, but he did have a simpler life than he did. But one of the famous quotes is this first one from the book, which says, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. And so he was a bit of a philosopher. He was good friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Transcendentalists. And so I put a little article in here that you can read about him. We read this book when we're in high school, so it's kind of one of those books that stays with you because it really makes you question still, and I think it's still a valid book, makes you question what's important in life. Okay. He also is considered kind of the father of the conservation movement. So when we think about Earth Day in the 1970s, um, there are many people believe that he was maybe one of the first people to start talking about that already in the 1800s. So he's a philosopher naturalist. So there's a nice little article about him that I invite you to take a look at. Okay. And then we leave there, and I'm going to take you to Salem, Massachusetts. I told you I love Massachusetts, so I'm going to take you to these
Is he a
places.
witch? A
Excuse
witch?
me?
A witch?
Absolutely. Yes, we have to go because
With
it
the
was
drum, with the
famous.
drum.
Absolutely, Lamfrocka, you are right. Salem is famous for the Salem witch trials in 1692, where women were burned at the stake for being witches. And so Salem has that kind of has a witchy vibe to it. In fact, they have like a witches walking tour. There are lots of things you could do. So it's a city that has kind of this history that's it's a little bit macabre, but at the same time an important place to visit. So Salem is not that far from Concord, where we just were to see Henry David Thoreau's Walden Pond, but it's definitely worth a stop here. And I put a link to this walking tour so you can actually take the walk with them. Okay, so the link is just under here. Then we're going to go back to Cape Cod because these are all day trips. You know, you don't have to sleep in any. You could just. I prefer to stay in Cape Cod because that's where I have friends, and so you might want to do that too. I'm going to take you now to Woods Hole, Massachusetts, which is where the Captain Kidd is, so we can have a quahog for sure. But it's also a place that's important because it's the home of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And so this is a very important place where there's a famous submersible called the Alvin. Okay, now this photo is kind of cut off, but it's basically like, I guess we would call it a submarine, but it's a human goes inside it and can look at the ocean floor. And you can visit Alvin, you can go inside. And Alvin is especially famous because Alvin discovered the Titanic. So the Titanic had been missing for so long, and I think it was in 1986 that Alvin found the Titanic, and they could actually explore the ruins of the Titanic thanks to this submersible. So that's kind of cool, and you can actually sit inside it. It's pretty neat. And so this Oceanographic Institute is actually linked with others. There's one in Trieste also. So some scientists, we share scientists, they'll go there, come here. So it's part of this scientific community, an international scientific community that, of course, is international and full of lots of very interesting people. So now we're going to take another trip. I told you we're going to go to Newport, Rhode Island, right? So we would do this probably another day. Newport is really only about an hour and a half away. Most of these places that we're talking about today are usually about an hour in the car. Okay. It's better to rent a car in these cases, a little bit easier than public transportation. But in Newport, Rhode Island, there are these, you can see the photo, it looks almost like the White House, doesn't it? This one is the Breakers. Okay, the Breakers is a famous mansion that was owned by the Vanderbilt family. And most of these, I guess you could call them mansions, villas, whatever you want to call them, were active until about the 1960s, and that's when most of these families had to actually sell these houses or open them up as museums just because it just became too expensive to run them. So all that money from the 19th century, usually around the 60s, people had to change their it wasn't people weren't able to keep that up anymore. But anyway, the Breakers reminds me a lot of of what we have Miramare in Trieste. So obviously my point of reference is in Trieste where I live, but maybe if you went to visit these places, they would remind you of something different. So it's called the Breakers because it overlooks the ocean, and the breakers would be like the cliffs, where the water comes up and breaks against it. So beautiful views, just an amazing house. But you buy a ticket and then you can visit several of these mansions. But I also gave you you can also do the audio tour. You can, take a look at some of the pictures here and read about the history of these mansions. It's fun because you can also see what a day of the life, of these people was like, etc. Okay. So Silvio's is our definition person today. Okay. So once we're done with this, I just think it's fun to see, to pretend that I'm from a very wealthy family, but so that's fun. We're going to leave there. And I thought we could have a day of mountain climbing. We could go to Mount Washington, which is in New Hampshire, because, once we visit all these places, we want to get back into nature and reconnect. At this There's this link here where you can actually go and you can actually see in real time. You can check the weather and what you see from Mount Washington. When I was a teacher at Falmouth Academy in America, we used to take our students there once a year and climb Mount Washington. So it can be done. This is a photo of it in the fall, and isn't it beautiful? Just all the autumn colors. Okay, so for me, since I am from Wisconsin, which is very flat, this seemed very, very treacherous and scary for me, but even I could climb it, so that's good. Okay, and this is just the view of Mount Washington in New Hampshire. Now, my best friend at the time, Sirka, used to have a house on a lake, and so I also went kayaking on her lake and discovered all kinds of birds because they're in New Hampshire. People love birds. And so they are birders and they will tell you everything and make you fall in love with nature and all the simple things. So I suggest we go to New Hampshire for 1 or 2 days and just enjoy some nature. Then I'm going to take you. This is kind of our last stop for this trip. Huh?
The Norman Rockwell Museum.
Yes, we're going to the Berkshires now. So this is in Stockbridge. This is in Massachusetts as well. And this is, if you know who Norman Rockwell was, he was famous for these covers of the Saturday Evening Post, which is a magazine. And he was a humorist. He was one of our first sort of caricaturist he was a humorist illustrator who did these great drawings about American life, right? And sometimes he sort of drew the sort of perfect American family. Obviously, it was just image and whatever, but he's very famous. So we could go to this museum where even right now there's a very interesting exhibition going on that compares the humor of his drawings with some more modern artists who are in the magazine Mad Magazine, which is a magazine that's been around, oh gosh, since my mom was a little girl. And my brother is actually an artist who's been in it a few times. So I feel like this could be really fun to visit, especially if I could get my brother to come with us and he could explain some things to us.
Caroline,
So, yes.
Look at this book here.
Okay, let me see if I can stop sharing and take a look. Oh, look at that. And you have I love that drawing on the front. It's the triple self-portrait, right? That's wonderful.
I bought it many years ago.
It's very beautiful. I love it. Let me see if I have anything else. I might have to finish our conversation because it looks like there is a very big thing happening over here. Let's see. There are important people showing up right now, so I might have to cut it short in a second. But let me just see if there's anything else on our list. I don't think so. Oh, yes, there's one more stop.
Martha's
Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard. Do you see that?
That is the Kennedy Island.
Yes, exactly. So the Kennedy Island, this is, you can see where it is. We were right Woods Hole before, and now we're on Martha's Vineyard. This is where many presidents go on vacation. So I thought I would take you there as well. And then, just as a last little thing, I just want to talk about the word Yankee. So a Yankee, for many people, is just an American. But in America, it's actually someone from the Northeast. Okay. So a Yankee is a native or citizen of the United States. Okay. But we also consider, oops, no, this thing, get rid of that. Oh, it's also talks about a type of character. When we talk about a Yankee, it's also someone who is very conservative, but it could also just mean someone who doesn't really, they're not necessarily as friendly as the Midwestern, but they're very good friends. I have to say that in my time living in New England, I found people to be very, very, they would never say, "Oh, will you be my friend?" Or they would never say, "I really like you." But if they choose you, you will go to work one day and they'll make you a cake or a bread or something. They'll be like, "I made you some bread," and then they'll run away. So they're people who have a hard time expressing their emotions, but they're very loyal friends. In fact, some of my most important friends are the friends I made when I lived there for the 2 years I lived there. So I love to talk about them because this was an important time in my life. But I think I have to let you go because it's starting to rain on my computer. And there's also a ceremony happening next to me. So, what I told Simone before is that if this happened, which of course it's happening now, that we would just, whatever time we don't finish today, we will add to the time when I'm with you, which I think is in 2 weeks, or we can add them next week. Okay.
Okay, okay.
I'm sorry. It's just that I'm getting
No,
rained on.
Today you are too busy.
it's okay.
I'm so sorry.